but you also don't want to wait till the last minute in case there is a problem that holds you up.
Right, and
that can happen.
When you said it's a pretty fast process, what I find, because I work a lot with couples and with families, and that theoretically it can be a fast process, but what I find ends up taking a little bit more time is answering some of the questions within it.
Right.
So it's like to enter it in, that can be pretty fast, but then when you have to be able to say, this is what my income was, this is where our costs are all going, right? And it does get into more detail, what's your whole financial situation look like? And I find that oftentimes people don't know.
Right.
And part of where the panic comes from in this process is actually looking at what the numbers are for them.
Right.
And that there's this, for lack of a better term, like a come to Jesus moment where they're like, oh my gosh, this is really where all of our money's going, and this is why we're feeling like this. And then that's something that kind of they have to be working through and being aware of at the time, and sometimes that's where I end up holding people's hand through it a little bit to be able to look at that information.
Well, if the FAFSA, I guess for better or for worse, doesn't actually ask for that kind of detail. So it actually just tells people to pull the information right off their tax returns. It references the line numbers from the tax returns, and it's entered on in there. It doesn't really get into debt, and it doesn't get into a lot of the family's expenses. So it's pretty cut and dry. There are some ways to work around that, not work around that, but get those incorporated if it isn't reflective, if there's been a dramatic change from one year to the next. And we can talk about that in a little bit.
So then how are we defining financial need?
So financial need is this odd little thing where the college will take the number that's come from the FAFSA, which is called the Estimated Family Contribution, or EFC. In our world, we talk in a lot of acronyms. So the free application for federal student aid, or FAFSA, generates the EFC, which is the Estimated Family Contribution. The college gets that. The college has something called a cost of attendance, or COA, which is tuition, room, board, books, fees, lab fees, transportation expenses, health insurance if required, a laptop if required.
Like the all-in.
The all-encompassing number, right?
Okay.
So cost of attendance minus the financial need, minus the EFC, the family contribution, is what gives you your estimated financial need. Having worked with families for a very long time, almost 20 years, I can tell you that what the family thinks is their need and what the college derives as their need are generally pretty far apart. So that's just a very cut and dry formula as to how the college determines need.
So two things that you just reminded me of. So then if the process doesn't consider all of the other expenses that you have, how are they coming up with that family contribution amount?
It's income and assets.
Income and assets.
Income and assets, and mostly it's income. So that's the main driver of the number, is parent income.
So it's actually a really good incentive to get your expenses under control, because the expectation then is that you can be paying for it.
That's right. That's right.
Based on that, for sure. Okay.
So I mean, if there's extraordinary expenses,
for people to hear about.
Yeah, it's I think very surprising for families that haven't heard this before, that their expenses aren't taken into consideration, particularly in this part of the country where it's a little bit more expensive to live than it would be somewhere where you don't need winter coats, maybe.
Right. Yeah, I mean, all these things are worth considering.
It's not factored in.
Right, yeah. So everyone, make sure that you're figuring out what your financial situation really is and how can you make your income go farther.
That's right.
And yeah, that's probably a whole nother show.
It could very well be.
Actually, we have done some shows on savings, so go check out our past shows at ownyourmoney.com. So what kind of loans are available, and what kind of rates are people getting now on these federal loans?
For federal
loans, I should say.
There are a bunch of different types of loans available, but we always recommend that people max out their federal options first. So for students,
and that would be because they get the best rates.
They get the best rates, right?
And is interest deferred? Is that why?
It can be. It generally is. It can be, and there are also more protections in place with those loans in cases of, nobody likes to think about this, but if there's a death, the loans are forgiven, as opposed to some of the other types of loans where they go to the estate. So there's a lot of good reasons to use federal money first. So what we recommend is that the student, if the parents think that the student should be involved in his or her own education, should borrow the Stafford loans.
Okay.
Those rates, there are we call them two flavors of Stafford loans. One is subsidized and one is unsubsidized. It will be clearly delineated on the award letter what type of loan the student's getting. Subsidized means interest does not accrue while the student's enrolled, and up to 6 months after So it's the best type of loan there is. Currently, the interest rate is 5.6%. And if it's subsidized, no interest is going to accrue, even if there's graduate school beyond the 4 years or whatever.
It's important to recognize that you could then be deferring your interest for the 4 years of the school plus the 6 months afterwards, plus potentially graduate school. Okay, great. Thank you.
Unsubsidized means that there is interest that accrues, but no payments are required. And those are a little bit higher. Those are at 6.8%. The student does have the option to have those payments made while they're in school. It's a little challenging for most students to do that, but it will keep the balance low. The problem with the Stafford loans...
Or keep the balance from increasing.
From being compounded with interest on interest.
Right.
The problem with those loans is that they're very limited. So the maximum a student can borrow, an incoming student, is up to $5,500.
Oh, okay.
So
that won't go too far.
Not going to go too far. The next thing that we would suggest that families look at, should they need to borrow additional funds, would be a Parent Plus loan. And that's a loan that the parent would take out in his or her own name. The interest on that is between 7.9 to 8.5%, depending on the loan program that the school is in, and the school will give the student that information. No payments are required on that loan while the student's enrolled, and interest can be deferred. Now, we would strongly recommend that parents, if they're in a position to, start making payments while the student's enrolled, again, to minimize debt and not have, borrowed $10,000 that turns into something much larger 4 years later. So those are the two main types of loans. Then there's a bunch of different loans. They're called private or alternative loans that don't have any federal backing to them. They're primarily based on credit. So the Stafford loan is not based on credit. The Plus loan is based on not having derogatory credit. And then there's a whole slew of private loans where it's usually the parent or the student doing the borrowing. Most of the time, those interest rates are variable.
Oh, wow, really?
Right. So right now...
right now they may be good, but once your child gets out of school...
Or, when things start getting better in the economy, interest rates will go up. I can tell you that when I was a financial aid director, I routinely saw interest rates in the 12, 13, and 14% range, and that really adds up quickly on the balance of the loan. MIFA is probably one of the only loans...
People feel it on credit cards, and it's basically would be doing the same thing to them.
MIFA does offer a fixed rate loan, which is, I think we're one of the only few in the country that does offer that, and it's a family loan where the parent and the student sign it jointly, so that there can be some sharing of responsibility on the back end.
I like that idea.
Yeah. I think a lot of families do once they understand that even if it's a loan in the student's name, the parent would be co-signing for it anyway.
But the student is ultimately taking responsibility as well. I mean, I guess they're both ultimately taking responsibility.
They are both. And I think for a lot of families, that's kind of, they don't necessarily understand that a co-borrower is as responsible as the primary borrower in these circumstances. So without getting into too much detail, those rates are all over the board. Our MIFA's loan is 7.75. Some of the private loans are 8, 10, 12%.
Wow, so they're variable and they're starting that high.
Yeah.
Because now, for instance, like a variable home equity line can be anywhere from 2.5 to 4.5 or something, but on a much lower scale than 8.5. Wow.
Yeah.
We had also talked about some of the myths in college financing because I feel like those are so strong. And can you share with us maybe what your top 2 are, say, and what the reality really is?
I would love to. Thank you for asking that question. The biggest, I think there are 2 big ones. The first one that we hear over and over again in the media, particularly in the spring, is that colleges will be willing to negotiate financial aid packages with you, sort of like a car deal. By and large, that is not the case. What happens, though, is, remember how I said that if you're filing for fall of 2010, it's based on 2009 income information? If that's not reflective of what's actually happened, so let's say there's been a job loss, or let's say there's some significant medical expenses in the family that aren't factored in on the FAFSA, because the FAFSA is just a bunch of little boxes. There's no room to write something.
Right.
If there's something that the family feels isn't reflected in the FAFSA, that's when we call it professional judgment. That's when they need to go to the college directly and talk to somebody in the financial aid office and say, look, can you please, I lost my job in January of 2010. My income is going from $50,000 a year to $10,000 a year. Can you please work with that number instead? And they will, provided the family can document the circumstances. And that's more what you hear. I think it's not negotiation. That's actually something that the family has the right to do.
It's like a change in circumstances that need to be communicated to the school, so then the school can make the best decision that they can
Right.
for you based on the change in
That's
circumstances.
right.